Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Podcast Pasta. That's a podcast that's like pasta, not the podcast that's about pasta. As always, I'm your host, Mike. So, a while back ago, I did kind of this retrospective on PBS with a focus on PBS Kids, talking about my early history with the network slash programming block, as well as kind of exploring why I think it was very interesting and unique, especially for its time. And I had a ton of fun recording that episode, kind of reminiscing on these old shows that I grew up with. So I kind of want to do something like that again, except for a network slash programming block that appeals to my more modern taste with Adult Swim. Now, before I get into that, I guess I should do kind of a bit of housekeeping. I know I've had a small influx of subscribers come to the channel. If you are a new subscriber listening to the show, thank you so much for subscribing. I know this might not be what you're typically used to from my show, because, like I said, you came from interviews. Uh, so most of my modern content is focused on interviews, but from time to time I do these solo monologues where I talk about a random media topic that comes to my head. So if this isn't up your alley, I completely understand. I will try and get back to doing interviews in the next episode. I just kind of wanted a break to myself and return to like kind of the old tradition that this show started with. Um, so again, if this isn't for you, you could skip this episode. I completely understand. If you are new to the channel and you're not subscribed, say it with me, like, comment, and subscribe. It greatly helps the channel. But getting back on topic, so with a lot of these solo monologues I do, I never know how much of a primer I have to give when discussing these topics, right? Because over the years, especially with my work interviewing artists and animators, I imagine I've accumulated an audience that is also into art and animation like myself. So a lot of you probably already know what Adult Swim is, but I guess for the sake of completeness and thoroughness, I'll give a very brief definition. So, to simply put, Adult Swim is just the late night programming block for Cartoon Network focused on like more mature rated content as opposed to Cartoon Network's usual programming, which is focused towards a younger audience. It's not a concept unique to Cartoon Network. Other main networks have like a late night programming block. For example, Nickelodeon has Nick at Night. You have late night talk show hosts, late night talk shows, as well as Saturday Night Live. So not a new concept necessarily for Cartoon Network, but one that has drawn, I guess, an interest for me because, again, I think Adult Swim, out of all the other late night programming blocks, has such a focus on like animation in particular. But I'll get more into like what appeals to Adult Swim, or what about Adult Swim appeals to me a bit later. So yeah, late night programming block for Cartoon Network. And it's honestly how they derived the name of the block. I don't know if this is really a big thing anymore. I think I've only been to like one pool that had like Adult Swim hours. It was like, I think Mandalay Bay in Vegas has a pool like that, or at least had a pool like that. I don't know if they do anymore. But I guess for any younger audience members that don't know, pools, I guess back in the day, had like what they would call Adult Swim hours, where usually in the evening or later at night they had dedicated swim time for just adults, right? So like kids wouldn't be able to swim. It's actually funny. I remember adults, actually a lot of the early Adult Swim promos and bumpers actually kind of featured like the public pool motif, kind of leaning into it. But in understanding what drew me to Adult Swim content early on, it wasn't their early original programming. Like, don't get me wrong, like one of their first original shows was like Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and I've seen clips of it, over the years, and in retrospect, I could see the appeal of it. Right, I like how it kind of recycled old Hanna-Barbera animation and kind of like this comedic style, right? But I think why that show didn't appeal to me when it first came out was that I was just kind of outside of the target demographic for it. Like, I think when it came out, Space Ghost Coast to Coast appealed more to like you know, college age individuals. And, at the time I was like a preteen teenager, so it wasn't going to hit for me. Right. I might check it out though eventually because, like I said, I've seen clips of it and it does look funny. And it's interesting because I think out of a lot of the Adult Swim's original content, it seems to be the most Y2K coded. I don't know. That's just the vibe I get from it. Maybe because it featured a lot of stars that were big during that era. That might be it. But I don't know. Maybe I'll check it out in the future. No, for me, what was the initial appeal for Adult Swim was that a lot of their early programming, and even now their programming is still kind of consists of it, but they would feature a lot of reruns of old animated adult shows, right? Both syndicated shows as well as like smaller shows that only had like that were canceled very early on or only had like one or two seasons. So it featured shows like King of the Hill, Family Guy, American Dad, as well as like shows that I got my first experience with via Adult Swim. So like Home Movies, Dr. Katz, etc. Um, and like I said, I think for the most part they kind of stopped doing like the canceled animated shows, maybe because like they just don't have the same appeal as like the syndicated ones, or because of like licensing issues. But I mean, even now you can still find that they run, King of the Hill, Uncensored, Family Guy, American Dad. I think they even recently added like Bob's Burgers, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't know. I'm trying to remember from. I do trips from time to time, and when you're in a cheap motel, the only thing and you have like bad internet, the only thing you could really watch is like whatever's on the like cheap cable that they have, and I always default like to Adult Swim, right? But that was the early appeal for me with Adult Swim. Eventually, I did get into their original animated content. The first show that I got into was Aqua Teen Hunger Force. But even then, I didn't get into Aqua Teen Hunger Force when it first came out. I got into it more when they started doing the a little bit before the movie came out is when I got into it, and like immediately it just appealed to like my stupid sense of humor. I I loved kind of the cheap animation of it, or at the very least it didn't like bother me that I imagine a lot of critics would be bothered by. Um, but no, and then ever since then, I've fallen in love with the network. Even like and fast forwarding today, it's like I think become very much a juggernaut, and especially like I think even more of a focus on Cartoon Network's programming than ever before, especially since like in recent time there's been shifts over like especially like the demographic for like cable viewership in general, like younger kids and even like teenagers to some degree don't really watch like TV in the same way that they used to. They're on that dang old YouTube with Mr. Beast and Logan Paul, or on Twitch or whatever, right? So and to reflect that change, like and to reflect more of the focus with Adult Swim, they've even recently like moved up the Adult Swim programming block to start at like 6, right? And a whole bunch of changes over the years. They incorporated Toonami, so now you have anime mixed in with the block. Live action content with Tim and Eric, Eric Andre's show, Joe Parra Talks with You, a show that I did a review like way back in the day. I think that was like back when I was just on Spotify. And yeah, so I guess in understanding the appeal of Adult Swim for me is kind of interesting because I run through a few different paths. One would be Adult Swim appeals to me because it has a focus on art and animation, which I clearly have a passion for with my work, and that is a part of it, right? But no, like I said, I do like their live action shows too. Like I love Tim and Eric, I love Eric Andre, and stuff like that. So I don't think it's just that it's like has a focus on like animation, right? Um, Part of it could be the humor of a lot of these shows hits me, which yes and no. I mean, I'm not a big like druggy, right? I'm not usually in the like stoner target demo for a lot of like shows and stuff like that. And God, I don't know. I've always hated it as a label because I feel like more often than not, it's like derogatory. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of shows and even like a lot of Adult Swim shows that I do think fit into that like, slop just appeals to like people that are high on substances or whatever. Um, but that's never been me, right? I've never been into that like type of like culture broadly. Um, so I don't know if I can necessarily say it's that, and even more so, I also like a lot of the more serious shows that Adult Swim does put out from time to time that doesn't appeal to that crowd. Like the recent one was I think it's Common Side Effects. It was the Mike Judge show, that the Mike Judge animated show about like the whole pharmaceutical company and everything like that. Which I thought was an amazing show. Oh my god! If you haven't seen it, go see it. I hope I'm getting the name right. I think it's like Common like Side Effects or something like that. I can't remember the specific name. So I don't know if it's necessarily that. I guess the closest I can think of is that um like at least for the time, Adult Swim was very like, and what made Swim unique for the time is that it's kind of had this indie feel to it. Now I know it's kind of weird to say that it's like indie, right? Because it's Adult Swim, it's backed by Cartoon Network, which is backed by Warner Brothers, one of the largest media companies out there, right? I don't think I don't know if you should actually consider it to be um indie, right? But I think like maybe it was because it's early history of being a cost saving thing and they had to rely on, animation from like smaller studios or like cheaper sources or whatever. But it's always had kind of this indie feel, at least to me, or at least it kind of bridged this interesting gap between like indie and like, larger, corpo animation, right? That you can even see reflected in its history today with all the money that Adult Swim has. It still kind of carries that indie feel with like, let's say, shows like Smiling Friends that Smiling Friends utilized a lot of indie internet talent, both in like the voice acting as well as the animation itself. And it's not just that. Like, there was another show that they had recently, Women Wearing Pants, which I apologize if I'm misattributing this. It's like independent Mexican animation. I don't. Oh my god, I might be pulling a racismo. I don't know if it's specifically Mexican animation, but it's like Latin American. It's like a Latin American animation studio. I apologize if I'm misattributing that. Please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on that. So I don't know. I think like despite like the growing size of Adult Swim, I think they've still been able to kind of have this indie appeal to a lot of their content that we're even seeing now replicated with other with internet indie animation distributors like Glitch, like VisiPop, what have you. Um, and so I guess that's always been like the appeal to me, is that I see like Adult Swim as like kind of the originator of that. I mean, to some you can't solely attribute it to Adult Swim. Granted, like you also have to give credit to like Newgrounds for also giving the rise to the indie animation scene, especially during the same era, because both Adult Swim and Newgrounds got started around the 2000s. I think, if I'm remembering my if I'm putting everything correctly in my head in terms of the time frame, right? I have to say, I think Adult Swim is still an amazing network. I think even in this modern day and age of like a lot of the rise of internet animation, I still think they have like a very unique spot for me, especially with like I would guess also like the diversity of content that they put out. I feel like they're not tied to just certain tropes with their shows. I feel like they have gone really experimental over the years with like what they've what they put out and what they've featured on their programming block. Um, but yeah, I think that's mostly gonna do it for me. Thank you all for tuning in. If this isn't what you're used to me doing, I apologize. I'll try and get back to that. Um, you know, in the future, get back to my usual interviews in the future. God, I don't really have a bit to end here. Hey, you know what? Um, I guess I'll talk about this because I can't really make this its own episode, but so I was thinking about Dispatch the other day. I don't know, it's because I saw like a clip of it or something, and I was thinking of like the what would you call it, like rivalry with like the Blonde Blazer stands versus Invisigal stands, and like ultimately who would you go for? Like in my initial run, I didn't go for either of them because it's like a workplace romance. It'd be super weird. I think that's the optimal choice in the game, given like how the story presents itself. But if you had to put like a gun to my head and pick Invisigal or Blonde Blazer, I'd probably say Blonde Blazer only because Invisigal smokes. That's like the one thing that clears Blonde Blazer for me over Invisigal. And I know some people would say, oh, well, if Invisigal loves you, she would quit smoking. And like, no, she wouldn't, dude. My mom hasn't quit smoking for me. You think Invisigal is going to quit smoking? Get real. Come on. Yeah. Come on, guys. Let's be real here. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. Take care.